The morning had started like any other for Lorraine Kelly's show, with the studio lights warming the set, cameras whirring, and crew members rushing to perfect every detail before the broadcast went live. Lorraine, with her signature charm and calm demeanor, had hosted countless interviews with celebrities over decades. But on this particular day, as she prepared to welcome Sir Cliff Richard, a living legend of British music, she had no idea the conversation ahead would descend into something far different from the friendly chat her viewers expected. Behind the scenes, tension had already started to build after Cliff reportedly demanded control over the topics that could be discussed, and Lorraine's producers had quietly refused. When Cliff walked onto the set, applause filled the studio. He smiled for the audience, waving like the star he'd always been, but his eyes betrayed a certain edge. Lorraine greeted him warmly, her professionalism as steady as ever. For the first few minutes, everything flowed easily. They spoke about his career milestones, the 60th anniversary of his first chart hit, and his plans for another tour. Cliff laughed, reminiscing about the old days of vinyl and screaming fans. The energy seemed light-hearted until Lorraine, following her producer's cue, steered the conversation toward a more sensitive topic, his legal battles and how the experience had shaped his outlook on fame and privacy. The air in the studio shifted immediately. Cliff's smile faltered, and he leaned back in his chair. "I thought we weren't going to go there," he said sharply, his tone cutting through the polite atmosphere. Lorraine, taken aback but composed, replied that it was an important part of his public journey, something viewers would want to hear in his own words rather than speculation. Cliff's jaw tightened. "I've said all I need to say about that," he snapped. The audience grew quiet, sensing the tension rising. Lorraine attempted to move on smoothly, but the discomfort had already settled thick in the air like fog that refused to lift. Trying to rescue the mood, Lorraine shifted the topic toward his upcoming album and asked whether his music was a way of processing emotions from difficult times. Instead of softening, Cliff took it as another veiled reference to the past. "I'm tired of people treating me like a headline instead of an artist," he said, voice raised now, his hands gesturing as if swatting invisible critics. Lorraine, still calm but visibly uneasy, reminded him that she had immense respect for his career. "Then why bring up the worst parts of my life?" he retorted, his voice echoing across the studio so sharply that one of the cameramen flinched. The producers, watching from behind the glass, signaled Lorraine to steer away from controversy, but the moment had already begun to unravel. Cliff turned slightly toward the crew, muttering something about being set up, which the microphones picked up just enough for the audience at home to hear. Lorraine tried to de-escalate, telling him gently, "No one's setting you up, Cliff, we just want an honest conversation." That word, honest, seemed to ignite him further. "Honest?" he said incredulously. "You call it honest when I've been dragged through the mud for years and now you want me to relive it here, on morning television?" The live audience sat frozen, caught between sympathy and disbelief. Lorraine's composure was remarkable, but even she struggled to keep her trademark warmth intact. "Sir Cliff," she began softly, "we admire how you've handled everything with dignity." But before she could finish, he interrupted again, "You don't know what I've handled, Lorraine. None of you do. You just watch." His words carried bitterness that years of restraint could no longer hide. It was clear this wasn't just about the question, it was about years of feeling misunderstood, scrutinized, and exposed by the same media world that had once celebrated him. At that point, the producer's voice crackled faintly through Lorraine's earpiece, telling her to wrap it up. But she couldn't simply cut him off mid-sentence without escalating it further. "Cliff," she said gently, "I think everyone watching knows you've been through a lot, but maybe this is a moment to show how you've come through stronger." Cliff shook his head. "You see, that's the problem," he said. "You all want a narrative. You want to turn pain into a story arc so people can sip their tea and feel inspired." Lorraine tried to interject, but he raised his hand slightly, continuing, "I'm done being a narrative for your ratings." The tension had reached its peak. Lorraine, now visibly uncomfortable but still poised, replied, "This isn't about ratings, it's about connecting with people." Cliff gave a small, humorless laugh. "Then why do I feel like I'm being interrogated?" His voice had grown louder again, and the audience shifted uneasily in their seats. Lorraine, maintaining her composure, attempted one last olive branch, saying, "I think we're getting emotional because it matters, doesn't it?" Cliff sighed heavily and looked directly at her. "What matters," he said, "is respect. And I'm not feeling much of that right now." The control room debated cutting to a commercial, but the director hesitated, hoping the storm might pass naturally. It didn't. Cliff leaned back, arms crossed, and muttered under his breath, "Same media circus, different day." Lorraine finally exhaled, realizing the situation could spiral further if she didn't intervene firmly. "Cliff," she said, "if you're uncomfortable, we can pause here." He shook his head. "No, Lorraine, let's be real, if I walk out, that's the clip you'll run all week, isn't it?" She opened her mouth to respond, but he stood up before she could say a word. The studio went utterly silent as Cliff Richard, visibly angry but controlled, removed his microphone. Lorraine, caught between professionalism and shock, tried to keep her tone level. "Sir Cliff, please, sit down, let's just talk this through." He turned to her, eyes flashing. "I came here to talk about music, Lorraine, not to be psychoanalyzed in front of Britain." His voice echoed off the studio walls, and for the first time in her long career, Lorraine seemed genuinely rattled. The producers finally decided to cut to a commercial break, but the moment was too big to erase, it had already happened live. When the cameras cut away, Lorraine stood slowly, approaching him with an extended hand, trying to calm him down. But Cliff wasn't having it. "You know what," he said, shaking his head, "I think I'm done here." Security discreetly stepped forward, not to remove him forcibly, but to ensure the situation didn't escalate further. Cliff glared at one of the producers and muttered, "You people never learn," before walking toward the exit. A few audience members gasped quietly, realizing they had just witnessed something that would be replayed endlessly by the afternoon. As he exited the studio, his departure was both dignified and defiant. Lorraine sat back down as the show returned from break, her expression composed but her tone noticeably shaken. "Well," she said with a careful smile, "sometimes emotions run high when the past and present meet. We wish Sir Cliff all the best." The audience gave a hesitant round of applause, unsure whether to clap out of support or relief. Social media, however, had already exploded. Within minutes, "Cliff Richard walks off Lorraine" began trending across platforms, with viewers divided over whether he had been unfairly pushed or had simply overreacted. In the hours that followed, statements poured in from both sides. Lorraine's team released a short note emphasizing respect and professionalism, while Cliff's representatives claimed he had been ambushed with personal questions he had explicitly requested to avoid. Commentators debated who was in the right, but one thing was undeniable: the confrontation had reignited a national conversation about the line between journalism and intrusion. Even former guests of Lorraine's show weighed in, some supporting her composure, others defending Cliff's right to draw boundaries. By the next morning, the clip had been viewed millions of times. Analysts called it one of the most shocking live television moments in years. Some pointed out that Cliff had carried emotional scars from years of public scrutiny, and this might have been the moment they finally surfaced. Others argued that Lorraine, known for her empathy, had merely done her job. The network, meanwhile, scrambled to balance public relations with the storm of attention, quietly pulling the full interview from its online archives while keeping shorter segments for transparency. Lorraine addressed the issue again on her show the following day, speaking directly to viewers. "Live television can be unpredictable," she said. "We all have moments when emotions take over, and I wish Sir Cliff nothing but peace." Her words were measured, her tone sincere, and it earned her praise for dignity. Cliff, on the other hand, took to social media days later, posting a message that read simply, "Sometimes walking away is the only way to stay true to yourself." It received thousands of supportive comments, proving that even in controversy, his fans' loyalty remained unshaken. Weeks passed, but the echoes of that morning lingered. Industry insiders whispered that Cliff would avoid live interviews indefinitely, preferring pre-recorded segments where he could control the narrative. Lorraine continued her show as usual, her reputation intact, though the memory of